Do you need floaties, sweetie? Because this is the deep end, and the deep end is for Marines who can actually swim. The laugh came on cue. Gunnery Sergeant Bryce Mercer stood on the instructor tower above the deep dive tank, 12 years of authority in his shoulders, and looked down at the woman by the equipment cage as though she had wandered in from a parking lot. The class of young Marines laughed because he had told them to, the way they breathed because he had told them to. The sound bounced off wet tile and a high ceiling and came back twice. The combat water survival facility was loud the way a machine is loud. Filters hummed. Water slapped the gutters in a slow, even rhythm. The air sat thick and warm and tasted of chlorine, and the deep tank lay in the center of it all, a flat black rectangle that swallowed the overhead lights and gave nothing back. Along the shallow instruction lane, 12 Marines stood dripping in a row. The lifeguard chair sat empty. The resuscitation bag sat in its red case against the far wall, 30 feet from the tank lip. The building had a smell and a sound that never changed, and Mercer had stopped noticing either one a decade ago. That was its own quiet danger. A deck a man stops noticing is a deck that can surprise him. The overhead lights threw long white bars across the surface of the deep tank, and the bars did not move, because the water did not move, because nothing in that tank moved unless a man put it there. 16 feet of still water under a flat ceiling of light. To the class, it looked like a swimming pool. To the woman in the corner, it looked like the thing it was, which was the most patient predator in the building. The woman did not laugh. She did not redden, did not look down, did not look for an ally in the room. She wore plain gray athletic clothes and a blank lanyard with the badge turned backward, and she carried a small, sterile bag with the logo taped over. She set her clipboard on the cage rail. Then she did the only thing on that deck that a professional would have done, and she did it without being told. She walked to the corner of the deep tank, where a person could see the whole sheet of water at once, and she stopped there. Her eyes moved across the shallow lane, left to right. She counted under her breath, the count of someone who had counted heads in water before, and her gaze did not drift across the 12 evenly. It snagged twice, on a private at the end of the row whose shoulders were already too high, and on the smallest Marine in the class, a 19-year-old named Riley Fontaine, whose breathing had gone shallow and quick before a single drill had begun. 12 years on this deck, Mercer said, to the class now. The auditor already filed away. 12 years, and nobody drowns on my watch. You know why? Because I don't run a daycare. The water doesn't care about your feelings. The water doesn't care about your contracts. A glance at the woman, sharp and amused. The auditors come, the auditors go. The water stays. I stay. He let his thumb move down the roster and stop on a name. Fontaine. Front of the line. You're my volunteer today. The smallest Marine peeled off the row and walked to the front, and the deck watched him go the way decks watch a man who has been chosen for something he will not enjoy. The deck was his kingdom, and the water was his to dispense. He believed that the way other men believed in gravity, and 12 years had given him no reason to learn otherwise. Against the far wall, at the deck phone, Chief Hospital Corpsman Marlon Tate logged in for the watch and clocked the civilian in the corner. 41 years old, 20 of them around men who hurt themselves in water, and Tate had learned to read a deck the way a farmer reads a sky. He looked at the woman, and something in him went quiet and alert at the same time. She was standing exactly where the bodies surface, not where a nervous visitor stands, not where the chairs are, not near the door. She stood at the deep-end corner with her weight balanced on the wet tile, as though the wet were not there, and her watch was turned to the inside of her wrist. Face hidden, the way a person wears a watch they intend to read while their hands are busy. Now why, Tate thought, Would a contractor stand where the bodies surface? He looked back at Mercer on the tower, loud and certain, and then at the smallest Marine walking to the front of the line, and then, again, at the still woman in the corner, whose eyes had stopped moving. She was looking at Fontaine. Fontaine, who was breathing wrong, and she had gone very still. Mercer ran the warm-up the way he ran everything, fast and hard and out loud. Weighted treads in the shallow lane, 8 pounds of gear on each Marine, 4 minutes on the clock, 12 men in chest-deep water with their hands above the surface. Hands up. Hands stay up. The second your hands come down, you're telling me you'd rather drown than be tired. He paced the lip of the shallow lane and narrated their suffering like a man calling a horse race. The woman in the corner watched the deep tank and the shallow lane at the same time. It was a thing trained people could do and untrained people could not. The eyes splitting the room into zones, the attention sitting on all of them at once instead of chasing one. Tate noticed her doing it, because Tate did it too, and on this deck only the two of them did. There was a discipline to how she watched, and it was the discipline of someone who had paid to learn it. Most people, asked to watch 12 swimmers, watch the most interesting one, the strongest, the loudest, the one making a show. The eye is lazy and goes where the motion is, but drowning is not motion. Drowning is the absence of it, a quiet that arrives where noise should be, and so the trained watcher learns to hunt the quiet, to feel for the swimmer who has gone still in the wrong way. Vance hunted the quiet. Her eyes touched the strong swimmers for a half-second each and lingered on the two who had stopped performing, because the two who stop performing are the two who are running out of room, and she had learned the cost of that lesson in colder water than this. The minutes ran. At 1 minute the lane was loud and strong. At 2 minutes it began to thin out, the way every lane thins, the bravado burning off into work. Mercer fed on it. He walked the lip and pointed and called names, and the strong swimmers showed off for him, and the weak ones tried not to be seen. And that, the woman knew, was exactly backward. On a deck run right, the weak ones are seen first and watched hardest. On this deck, they hid, because being seen meant being singled out. At 2 minutes and 10 seconds, the private at the end of the row, Coyle, 19, shoulders already too high, began to fail. Not loudly. That was the thing. He did not thrash. He did not call out. His chin dropped a half-inch toward the water, and his breathing turned ragged and small, in through the nose, fast, the rhythm of a man whose body had started spending more than it was taking in. His eyes had the flat shine of someone whose whole world had narrowed to the next breath. Mercer was at the far end, facing the other way, performing for the strong swimmers. The woman spoke. She did not raise her voice. It carried anyway, flat and clear and shaped to cut through filter hum. "He's not splashing," she said. "Watch the quiet one, end of the row. That's passive panic, not fatigue. He'll go straight down, no warning." Tate's head turned. Passive panic. 2 words a civilian auditor does not own. Mercer turned, annoyed, and found Coyle already going under, chin to the waterline, eyes wide and fixed on nothing. The gunny barked, "Coyle, hands, hands!" and hauled him to the wall by the gear strap, and Coyle came up coughing and clinging to the gutter, alive, embarrassed. Fine. It had taken Mercer 4 seconds to see what the woman had seen in 1, and 4 seconds is a long time at the bottom of a tank. "I had it," Mercer said, to the deck, to himself, to her. "I had it the whole time. That's how you do it. You watch the water." He coiled the moment back into his own legend and dropped it in his pocket. But there was a new thing in him now, a small irritation. the irritation of a loud man who has just been quiet a half-second behind someone he had already decided didn't matter. Tate crossed the deck to the woman, professional to professional, and kept his voice low. That was a good call. Approach from behind and below, you'd have said next, if it had come to that. Where'd you learn to call a drown before it happens? Around, she said. She did not look at him. She had not stopped scanning the water once, not to speak, not to be spoken to. Her eyes went lane, tank, lane, the deep end last and longest every time, a circuit with a rhythm to it, like a lighthouse that had forgotten how to stop turning. Around, Tate repeated, and almost smiled, because that was not an answer, and the way she gave it was. On the tower, Mercer clapped his hands once, hard. Enough warm-up. This afternoon we run the real thing. Gear and blackout in the deep tank. Full kit, full submersion. You stay under until I say, up. He looked, for just a moment, at the woman in the corner. And we run it my way? The woman wrote one line on her clipboard and underlined it once. By mid-morning, Mercer had stopped fighting the woman directly and started turning the deck against her instead, which was a thing he was better at, because it cost him nothing, and it taught the class who held the room. It began with a name. Give the lifeguard a whistle, he told a corporal, loud enough to travel. Maybe she'll feel useful. The class laughed, and the name stuck the way names stick when a man with power hands them out. The lifeguard. A Marine walking the lip tripped and sent a sheet of water across her shoes. Another asked, with wide, innocent eyes, whether she wanted floaties for the deep end, and the deck enjoyed itself, because cruelty with permission is the easiest fun there is. The woman did not feed it. She did not snap, did not plead, did not perform patience for an audience. She moved her clipboard out of the splash line and went back to watching the tank, and the not feeding of it was so complete that the game lost its flavor, and the Marines drifted back to their lane. You cannot play catch with someone who will not pick up the ball. Within 2 minutes the joke was dead, and the only person who had not understood, that was the man on the tower, who mistook her silence for a victory. It was a pattern she had seen in a dozen forms across 20 years, in wardrooms, and on dive boats, and on decks like this one. A man who has run a place long enough begins to mistake the absence of resistance for the presence of respect. No one had stopped Mercer, so Mercer had concluded he could not be stopped, and that conclusion had hardened year by year into a kind of weather he lived inside. He did not see the corpsman flinch when an evolution ran long. He did not see the junior instructor look away. He saw a deck that ran the way he said it ran, and he called that excellence, and the calling of it was the most dangerous thing in the building, more dangerous than the water itself. The water at least was honest about what it was. Mercer believed his own legend, and a man who believes his own legend stops counting, and a deck where no one counts is a deck that is waiting, quietly, for a day exactly like this one. Then Mercer reassigned her corner. You, trainee, deep end corner's yours for spotting. He turned to the woman. And you, back behind the line, liability, can't have a civilian hanging over my tank. She moved, but she moved the way water moves around a stone, finding the next place that worked. 2 steps back and 3 to the left, put her behind the painted line, and still gave her the whole sheet of the deep tank, the bottom included. She had not surrendered the water. She had only changed her angle on it, and she had done it so smoothly that Mercer believed he had won that too. What the deck did not see, because they were laughing at the clipboard, was what she was writing on it. 1 safety swimmer posted for a deep tank evolution. Doctrine. 2. The resuscitation bag staged 30 feet from the tank lip instead of at the lip. The tower running without a dedicated spotter. The times of each evolution against the ceiling. Names. the small, dry, specific language of a record, being built by someone who had built records before and knew exactly which facts a board would later need and which it would not. Each line was dated. Each line was timed. None of them had an adjective anywhere near it. She was not writing a complaint. A complaint is a feeling, and feelings are easy to dismiss. She was writing evidence, and evidence is not. Off to the side, Tate tried the only lever he had. "Gunny, doctrine is 2 safeties in the deep tank. I can grab Stroud, post him at the far lip, 2 minutes, and we're square." "Doctrine never met my pool," Mercer said, not even turning. "2 safeties makes the class think the water'll catch them. It won't. I catch them, or they learn. 1's plenty." And the deck's rules bent the way they always bent, around one man's certainty, because no one in 12 years had made them do otherwise. Tate stood there with the fix in his hands, and nowhere to put it, which is the particular helplessness of the honest man on a crooked deck. If you have ever watched someone bend a rule that mattered, simply because no one in the room would make them stop, and felt the cold little drop in your stomach when you realized no one would, then you already understand this story, and you should subscribe to Honor Tales, because this is the channel for exactly that feeling, and for what comes after it. The class broke for chow, and the deck emptied. The woman did not leave. She stood alone at the lip of the deep tank and looked down into the black water for a long, still moment, the way a person looks at something they have known a long time, and then she made one more note and capped her pen. Mercer escalated after lunch, and he escalated upward, to paper, because paper was where men like him had learned the world could be won without ever getting wet. He called the training office from the deck phone, loud, for the room. "Yeah, it's Gunny Mercer down at the survival tank. I've got an unescorted civilian on my deck interfering with training. Gave unauthorized instruction during an evolution, nearly caused an incident." A pause, while a voice on the other end said something reasonable. "Right. I'd like her access reviewed and her moved off the deck for the afternoon. Liability." He hung up with the small satisfaction of a man who has filed a thing that cannot be unfiled. It was a clean move in its way. He had taken the one person on the deck who frightened him, though he would never have used that word, and he had turned her into a paperwork problem, and paperwork problems get moved behind glass. He did not know that he had just handed her the last fact she needed, because a man who reports you for interfering has admitted on a recorded line that you tried. That was the irony Mercer would never appreciate, not that day, and perhaps not ever. He thought of paper as a weapon, and it was. But a weapon does not care whose hand it is in. Every move he made to bury her built her file instead. The complaint to the front office time-stamped her presence on the deck. The access note put his name on the decision to run the afternoon without her near the water. The roster in his own hand named Fontaine as the volunteer. A more careful man, a man who had ever once been held to account, would have felt the floor tilting under all that paper. Mercer felt only the small pleasure of a problem solved. He had moved the auditor behind glass, and behind glass, he believed, was the same as gone. He had spent 12 years learning that the deck forgot whatever he removed from it. He had simply never met someone who refused to be removed. The runner came within 20 minutes, a note, handwritten, official enough. The auditor's deck access was under review. For the afternoon evolution, she would observe from the glassed observation bay, not the deck. Mercer read it aloud, every word, savoring the texture of it like a man reading a sentence handed down to someone else. "Observation bay, ma'am," he said, "behind the glass, where auditors belong." She read the note once. She did not argue. She folded it in half along an existing crease, which Tate noticed from across the deck, because people who fold paper along the crease it already has are people who handle a great deal of paper and have stopped wasting motion on any of it. She slid it into her bag beside the clipboard, where the record was, and the note became part of the record, which was perhaps not what Mercer had intended. In the observation bay, she did a single thing that told the whole truth about her to anyone watching closely, and no one was, except Tate, through the deck glass. She did not sit in the chairs facing the door. She carried one chair to the window, set it at a precise angle, and sat where the glass gave her a clean line down into the deep tank, the bottom of it, the part that mattered. She had been moved off the deck, and she had answered by finding the one seat in the building from which she could still see the floor of the water. They had taken her from the deck. They had not taken her from the tank. There is a difference, and she had spent her life inside it. Sergeant Micah Stroud, 26, the junior instructor, had carried the access note up to her. He was a quiet man who had spent 2 years on this deck watching Mercer's evolutions run long and saying nothing, because saying something cost a junior Marine everything, and saying nothing cost him only sleep, and he had decided, long ago, that he could live without sleep. He handed her the note and lingered a half-second longer than the errand required. "It's just where they want you," Stroud said, low. "Behind the glass. That's all this is." It was almost an apology. It was the most a man in his position had ever managed, and they both knew it. "I know exactly where I am," she said. And she said it kindly, which somehow made it worse to hear, because it was the voice of someone who wasn't where anyone in the building thought she was, and who had decided, for reasons of her own, to stay there a little longer. Through the glass, she watched Mercer assemble the kit for the afternoon. Weight belts, masks, the full gear and blackout loadout laid out along the lip. She lifted her wrist and turned the watch face up at last and set a timer, thumbing it to the doctrine maximum for a weighted submersion, the number a deck is never supposed to exceed. Then she set her hand flat on the sill, and she waited, and her eyes did not leave the deep tank. Tate had been a corpsman for 20 years, and 20 years had taught him that the worst injuries are the ones a man has decided in advance not to see. He went quietly, off the record, into the log office during the lunch break, and he pulled the month because the deck would not tell him the truth out loud, and he had learned that the paper sometimes would. The numbers were there for anyone willing to add them. 3 evolutions this month run past the doctrine ceiling, 2 near misses logged as trainee fatigue, no further action. 1 safety swimmer posted where 2 were required, again and again, in Mercer's own hand. Tate stood in the small, hot room and felt the thing every honest person in a broken system eventually feels, that the record had been telling the truth the whole time, in plain ink, and no one had been made to read it. The system had not failed for lack of information. It had failed for lack of a person willing to act on it. He took out his phone and photographed the page, and then the page before it, and then the page before that. Then he went to the observation bay, because the civilian was the only other person in the building who seemed to be reading the same water he was, and a man who has just decided to be brave wants, very badly, not to be the only one. He did not know who she was, but he had stopped believing she was an auditor. "I'm going to say a thing," he said, closing the door behind him, "and you can throw me out for it. You're not a contractor. I don't know what you are. But you stand where the bodies surface. You called coil in 1 second flat, and you've got a record going on that clipboard that looks a lot more like mine than like a checklist." She let him talk. Her eyes stayed on the tank. "Here's what I know," Tate said. "Mercer's going to run the blackout this afternoon, in the deep tank. 1 safety short, and he's going to run it on Fontaine, who's the smallest one in the class, and the one Mercer's decided to break. I've raised it twice. I've got nowhere left to raise it. I'm out of room, and we both know the front office already moved you behind this glass." As she stood to face him, he saw the rest of it. The watch worn face inward, turned out now only because she had wanted to set the timer. No ring, no identification. The logo taped over on her bag. A loadout stripped of every identifying thing. Deliberate, habitual. The kit of someone who had spent years being no one on purpose, in places where being someone got people killed. His read of her finished assembling itself, and his stomach dropped. Because if he was right, then she could have ended Mercer's whole kingdom with one sentence at any point that morning, and she had chosen not to. "You could stop him with one sentence," Tate said slowly. "If you're who I'm starting to think you are, you don't have to stand behind this glass. You could walk out there right now, and it would be over." "I know," she said. "Post the bag at the lip. Be ready. Keep your log. That's it? Be ready." "The deck has to see it," she said. And for the first time she looked directly at him, and her eyes were very calm and very old. "If I stop it with a word, Mercer's a man who got interrupted by an auditor. He's back on this deck in a month, and he's careful for a while, and then he isn't. If the deck sees it, if the deck sees what he does when he thinks no one can stop him, then Mercer is a man who did it, in front of witnesses, and that ends him. One of those keeps the next Fontaine alive. The other just keeps this one." She turned back to the glass. "I've spent 20 years learning the difference. Post the bag." Tate stood there a moment with all of it landing at once. Who she must be, what she had chosen, what she was asking him to carry for the next 4 minutes. It was a great deal to put on a corpsman who had only wanted someone to back him up. But he understood it. In the place where men who run toward water understand each other without words. She was not being cold. She was being exact. The cruelty of waiting was real, and she had waited against the cruelty of letting Mercer survive to do this again, and she had made the harder call, and now she was trusting Tate to make it with her. He picked up the bag. He carried it to the lip. He set it down where she had told him, and he stayed beside it, and he did not look away from the water. If you want to see exactly who the woman behind the glass is, and what she does when the water finally calls her name, stay with this one and subscribe to Honor Tales, because the next 4 minutes are the whole reason this channel exists. Through the glass, Mercer gathered the class around the deep tank. He glanced once at the observation window, at the auditor he had filed away behind it. Then he loaded Fontaine's weight belt, and he gave the order to go under. "Hold the deck a moment. Before the water closes, you should know who the woman behind the glass is, because she has been someone for a very long time, and the deck has no idea. Her name is Adeline Vance. In the present day, she is 45 years old, and she is a captain in the United States Navy. And tomorrow, she is supposed to walk through the front door of this building and take command of it as the incoming commanding officer of the Joint Survival Training Center. She came a day early and unannounced, in gray clothes with her badge turned backward, because she had learned a long time ago that you see a deck honestly exactly once, before it knows who you are. After that, every deck performs for its commander, and the performance is a lie, and the lie is where people drown. But the part that matters happened 20 years ago, on a night in 2006, when she was 25, and the whole of her was a rescue swimmer, and the sea was trying to kill 9 people at once. A small craft had capsized in heavy seas, 58-degree water, swells running tall and black and cold. Vance went down the cable into that water, the way she had gone into the deep-end corner that morning, without being told twice, and she found the survivors scattered in the dark, and she did the only thing the job allows. She took them one at a time. One body in her arms, the long swim to the basket, the cable up, then back down into the swell for the next. Her partner, Petty Officer Daniel Rourke, worked the far side of the wreck. They counted to each other across the water, voices torn ragged by the wind. 9. Then 7. Then 5 to go. Then 4. She brought up the first, the second, the third. The fourth came up clinging to her so hard the corpsman had to pry the grip loose on the deck of the boat. 4 people who are alive today, who have children today, who have no idea their whole lives turned on the lungs of a 25-year-old who went back into the dark 4 times when 3 would have been a good night. She went back a 5th time, and the 5th time the sea took Rourke from arm's length. She had her hand on his harness. She had it. The swell pivoted, the wreck rolled, and the distance between her glove and his went from nothing to everything in the space of a single breath, and then there was only black water where he had been. She dove until her own air ran out, and the cable hauled her up against her will, her hand still reaching. The basket came up beside her, and it was empty. 4 came up in her arms. The 5th did not. The basket came up empty, and she came up with it. "I've got you," she had said into the wind, "the way you say it to keep a man swimming. I've got you." It was the one thing she told him that she could not make true, and she had carried the untruth of it for 20 years, in the place where a person keeps the things that do not heal. People who have not done the work imagine that the hard part is the cold, or the dark, or the weight of a grown man going limp in your arms. It is not. The hard part is the arithmetic. 4 is a number you can live with and never forgive. She had run that arithmetic 10,000 times in 20 years, at 3 in the morning, in the shower, in the half-second before a briefing, and the answer never changed and never stopped mattering. She had not gone into the water that night to be brave. She had gone in because someone was under it, and that was the whole of her, then and now, a person who could not stand on a dry deck while someone was under the water. The medal was a thing other people needed, a way for the institution to make sense of the night. The arithmetic was hers, and she had never handed it to anyone. They gave her the Navy and Marine Corps medal for that night. The citation was read short and plain: the theater, the year, the act, the decoration. And she stood at attention and let them pin it on, and did not feel like a hero, because heroes save everyone, and she had saved 4. What she decided that night was simpler and harder than heroism, and it became the spine of every year that followed. She decided that no one inside her reach would ever go under, because a professional had chosen to look away. Not on her cable, not in her water, not ever again, as long as she was standing where the bodies surface. That was the woman Mercer had handed a whistle. That was the lifeguard. 20 years, a commission, and a command later, she was sitting behind a pane of glass with her hand flat on the sill and a timer running, watching the smallest Marine in the class go down into a black tank 1 safety short. And she was about to find out whether the thing she decided in 2006 was still true. Through the glass, the surface of the deep tank closed over Fontaine's head. The ring of water spread and slowed and stilled, and then, under the surface, Fontaine's bubbles stopped. The timer on Vance's wrist passed the doctrine ceiling and kept going. A weighted blackout submersion has a number, a hard ceiling of seconds past, which no deck is ever permitted to run, because past that number, the body stops negotiating and starts shutting doors. Mercer was at nearly double it. He stood on the lip with his arms crossed and his head cocked, reading the still water with the confidence of a man who had never once paid for being wrong. And that, more than the missing safety, more than the staged bag, was the thing that was going to cost a boy his life, a man who had been right enough times to stop checking. Down in the tank, Fontaine had stopped struggling. That was the part a trained eye dreads, because the untrained eye reads it as calm, as compliance, as a tough kid gutting it out. The thrashing had peaked and passed. Now there was only a slow, dreadful slackening, the body's last economy, and a thin stream of bubbles that thinned and thinned and stopped. The water above him went smooth. Smooth water over a still man is the most dangerous sight on any deck, and only 2 people in the building knew it. Behind the glass, Vance watched the bubbles thin and felt the old cold settle into her hands. The particular stillness that wasn't calm at all, but its opposite, folded down very small and held very tight. She knew this moment. Not this tank. She had never stood on this deck before today. But this exact moment, when the surface goes smooth and a deck full of people keeps waiting for a man on a tower to say a word he is not going to say. She had promised herself 20 years ago that she would never again hold still while that moment ran out. The timer on her wrist crossed a number she had set with her own thumb, and somewhere under the smooth water, a 19-year-old's body was deciding, cell by cell, how much longer it could wait. The decision, she understood, was no longer Mercer's. It had never really been his. It was hers, and on some level it always had been, from the second she walked onto his deck and chose the corner where the bodies surface. Tate was at the lip with the bag, where she had told him to be. He called it. Loud. The way he had been trained to call it, before he learned that on this deck, calling it changed nothing. "He's under. He's not moving! Pull him, Gunny! Pull him now!" "He's faking." Mercer did not move. They go limp to make you pull them so they pass the evolution without tapping out. Oldest trick on the deck. Nobody quits on my... In the observation bay, Adeline Vance smiled. It was the first time all day she had smiled at Mercer, and it was not warm. It was the smile of someone watching a man finish, with his own hands, the document that would end him. He had been told. He had been told by his own corpsman, on his own deck, out loud, in front of a full class of witnesses, and he had overridden it. Whatever happened in the next 60 seconds, it was now a thing Mercer had done, with knowledge, against warning, and not a thing that had merely happened to him. The line had been crossed by the man himself, in the clear, where the whole deck could see, and that was the only thing she had been waiting for. Then Fontaine's body went fully slack and slid off its own buoyancy and began to settle toward the bottom of the deep tank, 16 feet down, a small dark shape folding into the dark. And for one full second, no one on Mercer's deck moved. The class stood frozen at the lip. The single safety swimmer hesitated, looking up at the tower for the order that men had been taught to wait for. Mercer's certainty cracked across his face, but his body had not yet caught up to it. The whole kingdom hung for 1 second on the absence of a single command, which is what a kingdom built on one man's word always comes down to in the end. The observation bay door banged open against the wall. She did not run. People remembered that afterward, the ones who could remember anything in order. She did not run, did not shout, did not waste emotion. She came off the deck the way water comes off a roof, fast and certain and without panic, already pulling the lanyard over her head, already reading the angle to the small, dark shape on the bottom. She crossed 30 feet of wet tile that had broken better men's ankles, as though it were dry ground. And at the lip, she did not stop to think about the cold, or the depth, or the clothes she still wore. She poured off the deck like the water had been waiting for her. The dive was clean, a flat, fast racing entry that put her under, and driving for the bottom before the splash had finished falling back. The deck above went silent. The filter hum, the slap of the gutters, all of it seemed to stop, though none of it had. There was only the closing ring of water where the auditor had gone in, and 16 feet below it, 2 small shapes now instead of one, the still one, and the one driving down toward it with 20 years behind every stroke. She reached him on the bottom, 16 feet down, in water gone gray-dark with depth. Adeline Vance got to Riley Fontaine and did the things the body remembers when the mind has no time to think. She found the weight belt by feel, the quick release where her hands had released 1,000 quick releases, and she dumped the weight, and it fell away into the dark below them. She got behind him and below him, the approach she had named that morning to a man who thought she was guessing, and she took his airway and his chin in the lock that keeps water out of a slack throat, and she drove for the surface with her legs, the long, economical kick of a rescue swimmer who has carried heavier men through far worse water than 16 still feet. No panic, no wasted motion. The count running in her head the way it had run for 20 years. The count that does not stop for fear, because fear does not bring anyone up. One body. The long pull toward the light. She broke the surface with Fontaine's head against her shoulder, and she did not gasp or flail. She rotated him, got the lip in her sightline, and moved him through the water to where Tate already knelt with the bag open and the red case flung wide. Then the two of them did the oldest work there is. They got him onto the deck on his back. Tate took the airway. Vance took the breaths. And they worked him the way two professionals work who have never met and do not need to, each one already moving to the next thing before the other had finished the last. Rescue breaths, the flat heel of a hand, the seconds counted out loud and hard. With me, 15, 16. The deck above them holding its own breath because it did not know what else to do. Because for the first time all day, the deck had been handed a problem its gunnery sergeant could not shout into submission. 11 seconds. 14. At 19 seconds, Fontaine convulsed under their hands, and the water came up out of him in a long, racking cough, and he dragged in one enormous, shuddering breath on his own, and then another, and his eyes opened on the high, wet ceiling and the two faces above him, and he was, against everything the tower had decided, alive. Vance rolled him onto his side into the recovery position, her hand flat between his shoulder blades, and held it there while he breathed. Her gray clothes were black with water. Her hair was flat to her skull. She did not look like a captain. She looked like exactly what she was, which was the last thing standing between a 19-year-old and the bottom of a tank. It was into that silence that the deck doors at the far end opened, and two men in service uniform walked in. Captain Warren Ainsley, 52, the outgoing commanding officer of the Survival Training Center, had come a day early himself to get the turnover started, his command master chief a step behind him. He took in the deck in one sweep, the flung-open bag, the coughing Marine, the frozen gunnery sergeant on the tower, and the soaked woman kneeling with her hand on the boy's back, and his face changed, and he came to attention. "Captain Vance." His voice carried the length of the deck. "We weren't expecting you until tomorrow." The command master chief's call followed it like a round behind a flash. "Attention on deck." The words moved through the room and rearranged it. The class snapped upright. Stroud came to attention. And on the tower, Gunnery Sergeant Bryce Mercer's face cycled through its stages one at a time, where the whole deck could watch. Confusion first, the blank of a man who has heard a sentence that does not parse. Then disbelief, the small shake of the head. Then recognition, the horror arriving behind the eyes as the pieces dropped into place. The auditor, the lifeguard, the woman he had offered floaties, the woman whose access he had pulled, the woman behind the glass, was Captain Vance, United States Navy, the incoming commanding officer of this building. His commanding officer. Starting tomorrow, Vance rose. Water ran off her and pooled on the tile. She looked up at the tower, at Mercer, and she spoke to him for the first time all day, and her voice was quiet and even, and carried anyway. "You had one safety swimmer in a deep tank, Gunnery Sergeant," she said. "I've got the rest." Mercer's arms came up into the position of attention before his mind had agreed to it. His body obeying a rank, his eyes were still refusing. The water she had brought up out of the tank, still running off the captain he had called Sweetie. The reckoning was quiet, which is how the real ones usually are. The loud part had already happened, in the water. What came after was just the world rearranging itself to match what the deck had finally seen. Captain Ainsley did not raise his voice, and did not need to. On Vance's read, given low and exact at the side of the deck, while a second corpsman settled Fontaine onto a litter, Ainsley relieved Gunnery Sergeant Mercer of his instructor duties on the spot, pending investigation. There was no shouting match, no spectacle for Mercer to push against, nothing he could turn into a fight between equals, because they were not equals, and never had been. There was only a sentence, and the slow dawning on the deck that the sentence had teeth, because the woman standing soaked beside the outgoing captain was the incoming one, and she had walked this deck for a full day as no one at all, and she had written every minute of it down. And there was the record. Tate brought it forward without being asked. The photographed log, the month laid bare. 3 evolutions past the ceiling, 2 near misses buried as fatigue. 1 safety swimmer, where doctrine demanded 2, over and over, in Mercer's own hand. Held next to the clipboard Vance had filled while the deck laughed at her, the picture assembled itself with no help from anyone. This had not been one bad afternoon. It had been a pattern, running for months, that had finally crossed paths with the one person on Earth least willing to look away from it. The consequence that should have caught Bryce Mercer years ago caught him in the space of a single day, because the system had finally put a person in the room who could not be made to bend and could not be moved off the water by a note. Sergeant Micah Stroud stepped forward then, and it cost him, and that was the point. He came to Vance with a small, water-warped notebook of his own, dates, times, the run-longs he had watched for 2 years and recorded and been too junior and too afraid to raise. He laid it down beside Tate's photographs, his hand not quite steady. "I knew," he said. "I wrote it down, and I sat on it, because I told myself, a sergeant doesn't get to call out a gunny. I'm not going to sit on it anymore." Vance looked at him for a long moment. "You kept the record when it cost you nothing," she said, "and you stayed quiet when speaking would have cost you something. Today, it cost you something, and you spoke anyway." She nodded, once. "That's where it starts. You're staying on this deck. You're going to help me teach it the right way. And the first thing you're going to learn is that the most junior voice on the deck is allowed to stop the water. Always. That's the rule now. If you believe the person watching the water should always be the one who refuses to look away, the one who keeps the record even when no one makes them, and walks in when the water finally calls, then this is your channel, and you should subscribe to Honor Tales, because every story here is built on that single idea. They wheeled Fontaine out breathing on his own. Later, recovering, he would learn the rest of it, that the small, soaked woman who had folded him into the recovery position and held her hand on his back was a captain, and that she had gone 16 feet down after him, while a man with 12 years on the deck stood on the tower and called it faking. The smallest Marine in the class, and the captain who had decided 20 years ago that no one in her reach would ever go under again. He would carry that the rest of his life, the way she carried 2006. It is the kind of thing a person builds a life on. Dusk came, and the facility emptied, and the deep tank went flat and still. Captain Adeline Vance stood alone at the lip, the deep-end corner she had chosen at 08 that morning, the place where the bodies surface. In dry clothes now, her command not yet a day old. Her phone lit once against the quiet. A short message. A coded greeting she had not heard in 3 years, and behind it, a name and a place. A follow-on combat water survival assessment at a coalition dive school on the Mediterranean coast, where another deck, she was being told, had decided the water did not care. By the door sat a folded set of dive fins she had not unpacked. She read the message once, and looked at the fins, and looked at the black water that gave nothing back. The deck was empty now. The water was flat and black and patient, and so was she. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.